Hello all and welcome to History with R&R Live at our special time of 1 p.m. Oh, 105, 106, whatever. I'll be late to my own funeral. And how are you doing, Jeff?
Doing pretty well.
And
How are you,
course,
Robert?
I'm alive. I can't complain too much. No one listens. All right, so we have
I
with
listen.
us today. Well, yeah, but I also put you on the Titanic and almost killed you, so I can't trust you too much. Um, you know, uh, we have with us today a person that I had on Rambling Canuck. He's been elsewhere and upwards since then. Um, he uh, he is Ryan Roger Athay, and I hope I said the last name right this time because I know I screwed it up the last time. Um,
Thumbs up. That's a good sign.
so first of all, before I get too far in, I've got a couple little intro things to do, mainly because I want us to hit at least 5 minutes before YouTube goes bye bye. So
It's not going to happen. Let's be positive.
So we'll go with Gorillo's Random Thoughts. Welcome to the chat. Mosser 1989. I hope I said that right. If I didn't, I apologize. I suck with names. Welcome, sir, or ma'am. This is your first time at the stream. Welcome. I hope you enjoy the content. As I said in chat, if you enjoy history, you will love the radio shows. They were started by Doom, and then I carried on the writing. So if you notice a dip in the writing, that's when I took over. And then John DeMarco, welcome. And Mark Dean Fleet Tire, awesome to see you, sir. Thomas Potts, welcome, sir. Mr. CCDV, who will be on this Friday.
Yay.
Welcome to the chat, Mr. CCDV. Mr. CCV, no, you didn't die in the Titanic. Although, on the first one you did show up, you did blow up right next to Jeff, and all anybody cared about was Jeff. But that's besides the point. Minor.
I cared about you, Mr. CCTV.
So, quick couple things I wanna touch on. I want to thank Ryan for his video on my late co-host on this very channel. Oh, I heard myself. That's a scary thought. Anyway, we started History with R&R, myself and Richard, and you did a very nice video. It was very touching. It was very respectful. Thank you for that. You also mentioned you also did a video on a guest that we had on here where I expected to get about an hour, and we ended up going for almost 3. And I think my mods were going, "What the? You said this was only going to be an hour." Tino Struckman. It was a great conversation. It was a lot of fun. We plan on having him back, but right now I believe he's between working, editing, and going to Europe and threatening to go to other places that I cross my fingers that he does well. And also welcome.
Is he going to Russia?
No. There's a few places he had planned to go in the Ukraine. So if he does go there, we for military history, not to fight, but for history issues, there are places there he wants to look at and stuff. So if he does, we wish him all the best. And of course, welcome Mrs. Canuck. So quickly, we're gonna now that all the pleasantries and my ramblings are done. So just a quick announcement. So for the next 2 weeks, because there's no way we're covering this topic in one stream. Let's see if we can get all 3 taken down. Anyway, we're gonna do this week, next week, and the week after on this topic with Ryan. So buckle up. This should be fun. We'll see if the channel still exists after this. But all right, so we'll let you go. We'll let you start off, and I'll jump in, and you just tell me to shut up if I'm talking too much. But you can guide us in, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. In terms of the rise of totalitarian regimes across Europe, mostly, the origin of that, in my view, would have to be the First World War, which completely transformed the politics and the geography of Europe from its start to its end, as well as the tens of millions who lost their lives during the conflict, as well as the tens of millions who died afterwards as a result of the Spanish flu. People were suffering and dying at a tremendous rate. People were starving. People were suffering. People were desperate. They were looking for hope, for alternatives. And they found them, in some countries, in the political extremes of the far left and the far right. Now, I know on YouTube you can talk about the far left all day and you get a pat on the back. But you can't talk about the far right and get away with it, folks, even in a negative manner.
No.
So I'm going to first of all talk about the rise of communism. It was firstly during the First World War when the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, managed to get into Russia thanks to the help of Imperial Germany in, I believe it was early 1917, because
Yes,
Lenin,
I'll
the
just
leader of the
interject here.
Bolsheviks,
One little
was...
thing. You may
Yeah,
also
sure.
want to blame the
Hmm.
Americans for that. But it wasn't just the Germans. But anyway, moving on. But yes.
Well, I was just going to...
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just about to say that Russia became, well, the Russian Empire as it was then, became the world's first communist state after the fall of the Russian Empire in early 1917 during the February Revolution, where liberals and more moderate people took over the government, but they were overthrown by the Bolsheviks. Today we would call them the communists. And after a 3 or 4 year long civil war between the communists and the what were known as the White Forces, former imperial officers, former imperial armies, as well as foreign nations, British Empire, the French Empire, United States, I believe Japan and Turkey as well, invaded. And the communists in Russia managed to beat them all back. And by early 1922, the Soviet Union was born. And they were the world's first communist state.
Yes. Yes. To be fair,
they were the world's...
the Russians really didn't have to beat back France too hard. Because after World War I ended, there wasn't a major thirst for let's fight some more. So in a lot of ways, more there was some fighting, if I remember right, but a lot of it was more like modern day. Here's some guns, and some money, and here's some, supplies, and you just have fun over there, and you win. We support you, but we ain't putting any more bodies on the ground, kind of thing. Because after World War I, what really sets up modern day, and sometimes documentaries about World War II start at the collapse of the Depression, when the stock market crashes in the United States. That's usually when they start, or they'll start at the failed putsch, but they don't go where it really started, which was in a train car at the end of World War I. And that is the wonderful thing called the Treaty of Versailles. It really shaped a lot of what we know today as modern day politics, geopolitics. A lot of the situations we're in started at that table. But anyway, carry on.
I believe it was in 1919. Yes. Well, Well, I was going to say that for a good couple of decades, the Soviet Union would be, in my view, or as far as I'm aware, the world's only communist state until the rise of others such as China and then later other countries, Cuba, Vietnam, North Vietnam, North Korea, as well as many others. But that's towards the end of the 20th century.
Yes,
And
it's a little bit of a jump, yeah.
basically the far left, the communist world, for the early part of the 20th century was only in one country, the world's largest country by a country mile, but it was only situated in one land. And over the course of two and a half decades, from the revolution in 1917 until the beginning of the Second World War in 1939, there was a good 20 odd years of repression, corruption, mass murder on an unimaginable scale, even by the standards of the far right people. Not many people know this, but the far left have committed massive atrocities throughout the 20th century. And it's never talked about in the West. Why? Because our leaders and people in education, the establishment, mainstream media, are sympathetic to the far left. They're not sympathetic to the far right. In fact, they chuck that insult at everyone when they stand in the way of their views. But in regards to the far left, yeah. But in regards to the first half of the 20th century, communism was basically in one country, whereas fascism and the Yazis, as some people refer to them, they were mainly in Germany, Italy, also Spain. Most people actually forget about Spain. There was a fascist regime in Spain up until the late 1970s. The West didn't do anything to bring that down. In fact, we helped them quite a lot to stop the communists outflanking us during the Cold War.
Well, yes,
but
45
generally speaking, but generally speaking, fascism, which I'll call it for all of the nations, for Germany, Italy, and for Spain, fascism mainly took hold after the First World War. Firstly, in Italy, with the rise of Mussolini, former socialist, who kept some of his socialist ideas, but twisted it towards a more national interest. It was like a mix of nationalism and socialism, which is what leads to fascism in Germany, that sort of mix of social nationalism with economic socialism. But in regards to Italy, it started off in Italy in the early 1920s. The existing government was overthrown by Mussolini and his black shirts. He was made prime minister by the king, and he remained prime minister, I believe, from 1920, it was either 21 or 22, until he was deposed in 1943. In regards to Spain, Spanish fascism was mainly rooted in the military under the leadership of Francisco Franco, who despised the Republican forces in Spain, which were mostly supported by the communists. They had been elected, I believe, in the mid-1930s to rule Spain, and they wanted to get rid of the monarchy and create a socialist state. And of course, a more fascist military isn't going to allow that. So they fought. They started, I believe, in Spanish Morocco, and fought their way up into Spain to fight the Republican forces with the help of Germany and Italy, and ultimately prevailed in 1939. But they remained neutral during the Second World War.
Yeah. Which kind of annoyed certain people. Because a lot of what we would know as Blitzkrieg and a lot of the battle plans and ways Germany waged war in World War II, the testing grounds was Spain. A lot of that like the Stukas, the Blitzkrieg, the armor, the all that stuff was tested in Africa, and it was tested in Spain. Italy tested a few things in Africa, and
Ethiopia, yes.
yeah, and of course, so when it came time to repay the favor, it was kind of we don't speak your language, sorry. You know, but the other thing too, like a lot of people, the Treaty of Versailles, and that's why I wanted to stretch this out for like 3 episodes, because really giving this justice and being able to talk about this, there are so many little things that fall into place that form the most perfectest storm possible. Because after the Treaty of Versailles, the German population is made to suffer for World War One. They're, all the blame is dropped at Germany's feet, even though it's kind of underspoken how odd it is. Because if you think about it, just on the surface, without politics being involved, and that's a nightmare. In modern day, if Russia decided, or China decided, or for whatever reason France decided, you know what, I'm going to bomb London tomorrow. Well, automatically the Canadian and the American military would be like, you did what now? And that's kind of what happens in World War One. Is a small spark spreads. Alliances have been made. If somebody picks on you, we'll come and defend you. Well, if somebody picks on you, we'll come and defend you. And i.e., you get World War One. Because those lines were crossed, the bluffs were called, and it was either, well, I either honor my commitment or I don't declare war. Well, I got to honor my commitment, so I'm declaring war. However, Treaty of Versailles laid most of the blame at Germany's feet. And Germany, after World War One, the people were already starving.
Blockade.
And because of the blockade, and yes, they had just pulled a whole bunch of troops off the Eastern Front and moved them to the Western Front. But where militarily, they probably could have fought for a little longer. But the problems at home were overshadowing the problems at the front line, which led to the "we were backstabbed," which is the later battle cry we'll hear in the 30s. We were backstabbed. But at the Treaty of Versailles, the French especially were very, very keen on making sure that Germany could not ever wage war again, and they would pay for what they've done. Because we don't... At the end of World War II, it's a different story. We rebuild Eastern Germany. Or Western Germany, pardon me. Western Germany. We rebuild it because we have to. Because the Russians are in Eastern Germany. We have to rebuild it. But at the end of World War One, it was, we're taking away this, we're taking away that, we're giving this, we're creating Poland, and everything is divided up, chopped up, and Germany is laid to blame, and you must pay us all this money, please. So Germany starts to struggle. However, after World War One, the United States experiences a boom economically. and they start funneling loans into Germany. And everything starts to level out. Now, I'm being very vague, so please understand that I'm just giving an overview. I'm not going into dates, details. I'm just giving an overview. So,
Well, I can add the details.
yeah, so you have it where Germany is starting to stabilize. Well, as Germany stabilizes financially because of the money from the United States, the rattlings from the fascist side, the rattlings from the communist side starts to diminish because the people are happy. You can't convince a happy people to do so. There has to be a reason. Well, the reason comes. The United States hits the market crash. Well, immediately the United States starts calling in all their debts. Guess who has a whole bunch of debts to the United States? Germany. Guess whose economy now tanks? Germany, along with a few other countries. But we're focused here for now. So then as the economy crumbles, the people standing on a soapbox, as we would call them, the people who stand on a soapbox, the sky is falling, the sky is falling, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. That when you walk by, you go, what a nut, and you keep walking. Well, as the economy starts to fall apart and the government goes into turmoil, those people on a soapbox's voice gets louder and louder. We told you so. We told you this was going to happen. You trusted the wrong people. These are the same people who backstabbed us in World War I. And so on, and so on. And it starts gaining ground and gaining more ground. Because the more desperate a people are, well, we tried these guys and it didn't do anything. We tried these guys and it didn't do jack. Well, maybe we should listen to this guy for once. Maybe he's not so crazy. And that's when it gets dangerous. Is when as a people are so desperate that they listen to the guy on the soapbox. And
So
the guy on the soapbox no longer becomes the crazy one in the room.
On both sides. Both sides
Yes.
were rising.
Yeah.
And it became a battle between which side was going to prevail. Ultimately, in Germany, it would be the far right that prevailed against the far left, which is quite a rarity nowadays. But if it happened today, the far left would prevail, without a doubt, because they are much more organized and they are much more politically acceptable.
And so what ends up happening is, like you said, there was the rise of the brown shirts, the rise of the red shirts. Can you guess which one back to? Which is also why they needed to go. But we can get into that later. But you get the rise, and then, okay, well, the president at the time goes, well, this guy seems to be pretty popular. We've done a lot of elections now. Really don't want to do another one. I know if I name him chancellor, then this will all settle down. And that would have worked.
That was the hope.
Would have been fine. Unfortunately, the guy who had the ultimate say passed away. And there opened the door. And the rest is history, as they say. So I'll let you fill in because I've been yapping for about 10 minutes.
Oh, sure. Well, starting with the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was divided into well, not divided, but pieces of their territory were given away to Poland, I think a little bit to Denmark, a bit to France. Part of their own country, the Rhineland, was demilitarized. Could you imagine that, folks? Say the United States or Canada lost a war to, say, hypothetically, Britain, and then Britain imposes a demilitarized zone in Quebec or the eastern seaboard of the United States. That would be a humiliation. Well, it was a humiliation.
Yeah, but can they just take Quebec? I'm just
I don't
asking
think they want
for a
it.
friend. Can they just take it?
I don't think they want it.
I'm just asking for a friend. Anyway, carry on. I'm sorry, I had to be a cheeky bugger.
The reason why the Treaty of Versailles, in my view, blamed Germany for starting the war is mainly because the country that did start the war no longer existed, which was the Austro-Hungarian Empire, who attacked Serbia, and then Serbia called on the help of the Russian Empire. Then the Russian Empire attacked Austria-Hungary, and then Austria-Hungary asked for Germany's help, the German Empire. Then the German Empire attacked the Russian Empire. Then the Russian Empire asked France for help, so they got it. And France declared war and attacked, I believe, the German Empire. And then in order for the German Empire to attack France, they wanted to go through Belgium. Now, Belgium was a neutral state allied to the British Empire. Now, Germany ignored Belgian neutrality and went through the country anyway because it's easier for them to attack. And then that's what led to Belgium getting into the war against Germany and the British Empire, which sets the whole stage for the First World War. Yeah. Now, the Russian Empire, by 1917, collapsed from within, and they surrendered to the German Empire, in which large swaths of Eastern Europe fell under German influence, which led to many millions of German and Austro-Hungarian troops going from the Eastern Front to the Western Front. But at almost the same time, folks, the Americans had joined the war as a result of Germany trying to convince Mexico to attack the United States. I know it seems insane now, folks, but back then the United States was much weaker and Mexico was a lot stronger. Because 50 years, I think 50 or 60 years passed, Mexico controlled Texas, California, most of the southwestern United States.
Yeah, but to be fair, there has both times that threat has been made, because it was made in World War II too. There's a lot of doubt on whether that was actually a thing or not.
Wouldn't surprise me if they made it up.
Especially World War II. That one was proven to be absolute phonier than a foam bat. Hi, Churchill. But anyway, but the other thing that a lot of people don't understand too is one of the other failed ones was in Ireland in World War I.
Yes, the Easter Rising.
Yes, which ended abruptly and without very much pomp and circumstance. But there was the idea of, well, we'll distract Britain by arming their, arming the Irish, and they'll have some fun, and then we have a little bit of that'll draw troops away from the main lines. So those kind of things were not really new. My other personal favorite is, well, we went to war in World War I because of the Lusitania. Nope, that was a battle cry. It was a little while later that the United States entered World War II or World War I. Lusitania was a sad event. But nonetheless, it wasn't the direct cause. You could add it up. You could put it on a chart and go, well, they did this, and this, and this. And well, then So it was
Mhm.
contributing factors. However, when it comes to World War One, Tino could do a lot better at this than I could. But when it comes to World War One, it is, I think, the most misunderstood war to date. I think
Hmm.
because we've got the image. In one documentary I was watching, and Tino said it too. There's the image in our minds what World War One was, and then there's the reality. One only has to go to Tino's channel to see the reality, which in our minds we always think of trenches. That's all it was trench warfare.
Hmm.
Trenches, 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 and more trenches. What we don't give credence to is also the fortresses that were involved. Verdun comes to mind.
Yep.
So it wasn't only trench warfare. And we tend to look back on World War One as it just being in the trenches, because that's been hammered
Yes,
home in
from
every
one. Yeah.
video,
Mm.
every documentary that we've ever seen. All they talk about is the trenches. That's where World War
Hmm.
One begins and ends,
Well,
is in the trench.
well, it was mainly from the perspective of the Western Front. Trench
Yeah.
warfare, to my knowledge, was not much used in the East. It certainly
No.
wasn't used in the mountain campaigns between the Italians, who entered the war in 1915, on Britain's and France's side, against the Austro-Hungarians. It certainly wasn't the case when the British took on the Ottomans in the deserts of Arabia, most well
No.
known through Lawrence of Arabia and the Arab risings. We, well, in the past, after the Second World War, try to big up the reputation of the West, so to speak, try to paint a narrative of the First World War and the Second World War through a Western lens, especially the First World War, to try and big up our enemies, to make them look good militarily, so it makes us even better when we whoop their ass, so to speak. So that's why most documentaries on the First World War, especially, show that Western Front aspect.
Yeah. And another thing, like, in a lot of ways, I don't think, on a grand scale, society as a
Mhm.
whole, and this is the way I look at World War One and World War Two in some aspects as well. The world today would not handle a war like that very well.
Oh,
Because
no, certainly not.
if you think about it, if three soldiers on the front lines of a skirmish today get three tanks get blown up in the square, that makes
Mm.
national news. That is a major loss, and it is. Don't get me wrong.
Mm.
But if you compare that to World War One, the men going over the top, the Somme alone,
Yep.
how much blood was spilt on both sides of the line, just in the Somme alone,
Mm.
blows anything we've done lately out of the water in a day, in an hour.
Mm.
We don't. I don't think we grasp. We hear the words meat grinder. We hear the words great loss. We hear the words, or we hear an astronomical number, and it doesn't register. And I think that's a sad thing. And I'm veering off topic, so I'm sorry. But
Mhm.
to me, it's always been something that is I've always felt strong about, that we really need to take a breath and really soak in what that meant. I mean, in France alone, almost an entire generation was gone. Just in France. Never mind Canada, never mind the United States, never mind Britain. Just France alone. Almost an entire generation gone. In a blink of an eye, gone. 4 years. Almost an entire generation.
And then after that, disease, the Spanish flu that killed many millions of people. I just wanted to thank Mosser for recommending the Great War channel. Indy Neidell is a great historian. He works with Sabaton, and I like that band, and I like Indy Neidell. I think he does some great stuff.
Yeah.
But in any case, the First World War had a profound impact on the generation that survived, which is why when the Second World War did come about, especially in France, generals, people in the high command, were readying themselves for the wrong war. France was readying for another World War I, while Germany was readying for what we know today as modern warfare. And that's why, despite France being the most powerful military at the time in 1939, in terms of an army, tanks, aircraft, not ships. I think the British Empire still had an advantage in ships. But in aircraft and infantry and tanks, they were number one. Germany was maybe in the top 10. They had recently recovered their economy after 6 years of peace and prosperity under a fascist regime. We have to say fascist because we can't say the other term and get away with it, can we? But if it was,
I just said not usually.
Oh, right, yes. But in any case, France was fighting the wrong war, and that's why Germany crushed them in a few weeks using lightning warfare, also known as blitzkrieg.
It was a little bit of a mix. One, France had determined that they were going to come at them on the Maginot Line, and the other thing that I talk a lot on this channel about not learning from history. Belgium didn't learn from history. Belgium decided that they were going to stay neutral. They were going to stay so neutral that French and British commanders were not allowed to survey anywhere in Belgium where they could put a defensive line. So because they didn't want it to be seen as a provoking war.
Act of provocation.
Yeah, act of provocation. So no, we're not even letting you into to scout places. Which of course, but it wasn't a cakewalk. We look back and we look at the Belgium campaign as a cakewalk. They did fight their hearts out. The problem was too little too late. It was just a different type of warfare. They weren't prepared for that. And even still, I mean, it took some doing to get where they were. The other problem they had was some French commander went, well, there's no way they're getting through there. And here's the irony to that.
The Ardennes Forest.
They're not going to be able to get through there. Here's something that everybody will laugh at. It was proven the tanks could get through the Ardennes by a French tank unit a year or two beforehand. Just saying.
Oh, talk about
In,
the
in
greatest
military
shot in the
maneuvers, it
foot
was
in history.
proven that a military mechanized unit could get through. But
And French units were bigger than German ones.
and the other thing that a lot of people don't remember is it was a 1-2 punch. They only remember the attack through Belgium. The first attack that came was the attack the French were waiting for. The attack towards the Maginot Line, which led them into a self-security. So they all started to mobilize towards what they've been expecting, because there it is. And then the main force...
They fell for the old bait and switch.
Yeah. So the main force comes through the Ardennes and loops in behind them. And then all their fortresses and stuff, they got caught with their pants down, is a nice way to put it. And it was one of the... And we're kind of jumping ahead here, which is, again, why I wanted to do this in 3 segments, because we're going to have to go hit rewind and talk about other things. But the actual day-to-day battling that took place, we always look at it as, well, they just rolled through easy as a knife through butter and it was all good. Not necessarily. In some places, yes. In most places, no. It was just bad coordination, bad decisions. The French communication system was an absolute mess. And a lot of that was because politically, the French had been an absolute mess since the Versailles Treaty was signed. Another foreboding thing, going back to the Treaty of Versailles, and I think we'll wrap it up for this week pretty soon, and I've been rambling on, so I think next week I'll shut up for a while and let other people talk. But after the Treaty of Versailles is signed, one of the French generals says, we have 20 years of peace. And the sad part is he was almost right to the day. So that'll give you a hint. But what I'd like to look at next week is, and talk about, is how these things just don't happen. And they happen for a reason. They happen because a people or a nation has been pushed to the point where nothing's working. You need a wheelbarrow of money to buy a loaf of bread, right? Nothing is working. If you have...
That's a good point, Ryan.
If you have... but worse. So, today...
But worse, yes.
Like today, as a general rule, if you're working, you can still somewhat supply food on the table for your family. You may have to work a little harder, but it is still attainable. We're talking when that no longer becomes the case. Where jobs are scarce to the point where you better do your job today and do exactly what your boss says, because there are 10 people waiting at the door, literally, to take your place. And they will happily do whatever you won't do. And we think, well, today is absolute collapse, absolute... No, you got to go worse. Worse than today. Because if you look at Germany after the stock market crash, inflation, was insane. Loaf of bread, the money wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. And that's not being sarcastic. That's being factual. The money wasn't worth it.
Yeah, it happened on
It
happened
cost
on
you
2
more money to make the
occasions.
money than it did.
1923.
Yeah. So you
It
go
happened
with
in
1923,
1923, and then in
and you buy a
1929.
loaf of bread, right? Like, no, that's not going to work. So you look at it, and the people or the nation, their backs are against the wall, and they're looking for that one person who has an answer. And they try this guy, and no, didn't work. I still can't. There's still no jobs. I'm still not putting food on my table. And then they try the next guy, and as they're doing that, those voices on the soapbox that I mentioned earlier are getting louder. And every time they go with, no, we're not going to listen to the guy on the soapbox. We're going to listen to this guy. And that tanks. And the guy on the soapbox goes, told you that wasn't going to work. You going to listen to me yet? No, we're going to go with this guy. Okay, you do that. And then that tanks. Are you going to listen to me yet? And he gets louder. And all the crazy things that he was saying start to make sense. Because it's got to be. Because we've tried all these other things, and they're not working. So he's maybe he's not as crazy as we thought. Right. And what really turned things around in Germany once the party that will not be mentioned took power, is all those things that weren't working suddenly started to work.
Like really well. I mean, I cannot underestimate, ladies and gentlemen, they turned one of the poorest, most economically deprived nations in 1933 into one of the, if not the wealthiest nation in Europe by the start of the Second World War in September 1939. In 6 years. Okay, they borrowed a heck of a lot of money and put in a lot of public works programs. But by the time the war started, Germany had one of the biggest economies in Europe and one of the most successful societies in Europe, strongly regimented, very discriminatory by modern standards, but very regimented to ensure peace and prosperity for what they considered to be German people, while anyone who was not considered German was driven out.
More importantly than that, what really made the turn was food. People were able to put food on the table again. People had jobs again. I mean, yes, you're faking it till you make it.
Oh, yes.
Such as the people's car, now known as the Volkswagen Beetle. Whoops. But the Autobahn in Germany. Well, people start to see my money is worth something again. Maybe this guy wasn't such a nut job after all. For the first time in a long time, and he's promising every family a car, and as long as we work hard and we those people were the cause of all the other problems. So that didn't happen. But look at that nice roadway. And you can see it in a very miniature scale today. And we'll get into that as we go along and see how long it takes for me to get canceled because I have a big mouth and I don't know when to shut it. But what I'll do is I'll open the floor for final comments and we'll wrap it up for this week. And then I'll hope that people will join us next week where I promise I won't talk as much. But Jeff, I'll let you go first. Then we'll let our guest here talk for a couple minutes, and then we'll promote what we got to promote and punch our ticket and get out of here. Jeff,
Well,
you go first.
I just want to thank you, Ryan, for coming on the show today. I hope you'll come back next week because I really want to hear what you have to say.
Oh.
I know Robert talked a lot today. I think he was trying to set up the discussion, and he did a really good job with that. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you say next week and the following week, because we're going to have you back the next 2 weeks, and I'll let you take it away.
All right. So
Sure.
Yeah, Ryan, it's all yours.
Well, I'd just like to say part 1 was the foundation, ladies and gentlemen. Part 2 is where we will build the house, explaining the interwar years, beginning with the and then ending with the Second World War. And then part 3, hopefully, the post-war world, where fascism is practically destroyed, and the world is divided into 2 between the capitalist West and the communist East. And if we ever do a part 4, we can talk about the modern impacts of the passage of history from the First World War to the interwar years, to the Second World War, to the Cold War, to the hyperpower years when America was the hyperpower of the world, to the modern day. So if we ever do a part 4, hopefully we do. But yeah, that's all I have to say.
All right, awesome. And do check out Roger. I always put your middle name first. I don't know why. Ryan Roger Athay's channel. I will have it in the description later on today or tomorrow. I forgot to do it this morning. I apologize for that, sir. But his channel is his name, Ryan Roger Athay. He does really good stuff. He lies about me in one video. You'll find it.
No, I don't.
Wow.
And I didn't pay him for that. I'll state that up front. No money was transferred. But he says other great things about Adaga and Loki and other people in the community, and he also gives his thoughts on other people, and he just makes really good down to earth commentary. And now before I leave, I'll blow everybody's mind because he didn't say it today. Everybody just take a look at the screen and remember that the person who has talked to you other than me for the last hour is 22. And with that, as Admiral Doom would say, thank you and good night.